Thanks, I'm not sure. Oh, how's the volume back in the back? Is that okay? Good? Okay, excellent. My name is Sophie Underwood and I'm the State Director of the Planning Matters Alliance Tasmania, also known as PMAT. Please turn all your mobile phones to silent, and we will be live broadcasting this event today and via PMAT's Facebook page, and the recording will be viewable anytime in the future, whether you're on Facebook or not. We aim to finish the meeting by 2 o'clock, and thank you to Anne Harrison, our former PMAT State President and awesome piano player. I would like to start by acknowledging the Munawina people, the original and traditional owners of the land upon which we meet today, and pay our respect to the elders past, present and future. PMAT has been calling for an Aboriginal Heritage Code because our planning system fails to mandate the consideration of impacts on Aboriginal heritage when assessing developments that will negatively impact Aboriginal cultural heritage. We will continue to advocate for an Aboriginal Heritage Code. It is brilliant to see so many of you here today. Thank you so much for coming. And for those of you watching online, we have a standing room only public meeting, and thank you for making the effort to be here. We are here today because the Tasmanian Liberal Government want to remove planning appeal rights and introduce a developer-friendly development assessment and approval process for developments not only across all our private urban land, but also in our World Heritage areas, national parks and reserves. Their proposed process will enable developers to bypass councils and you, the local communities. The Liberals also want to give themselves new top-down ministerial powers to initiate land rezones. This is a significant new power. For example, like Cambria Green and Skylines at Driffy Point, if councils reject a rezoning of land, that gives the trigger for the Planning Minister to override that decision. They also want to create new ministerial powers to make changes to reserve management plans to help facilitate developments on reserved land. PMAT formed in 2016 in direct response to the creation of the Liberal Government's Tasmanian Planning Scheme, which simply defines what developments can and can't occur across Lutruwita, Tasmania. We are now a statewide alliance of over 70 community groups, and since 2016 have been working really hard to improve the scheme as well as advocating for planning more generally. Conveniently for the property sector, the CEO of the Property Council chaired the process that wrote the statewide scheme. It's completely out of balance and favours developers over local communities. It favours developers over our cultural and natural heritage, our lifestyle, and puts at risk everything that locals love about Tasmania and what visitors love. The scheme is essentially a Trojan horse for removing public consultation and rights of appeal. Then in 2023, despite the fact that forced council amalgamations had failed across mainland Australia, and we're actually seeing the first de-amalgamations in New South Wales, the state government announced it would force council amalgamations, yet another way to reduce the community's voice in planning. Our position is that council amalgamations should be voluntary. In 2023, PMAT hosted 9 public meetings around Tasmania, which helped shift the government's position. We welcomed the government's announcement it would not force council amalgamations. But just 3 days after that, the government announced that they would remove councils from making decisions on developments and replace local councils with state-appointed development assessment panels. And this is why we are here today. This, of course, was welcomed by the property industry. We saw images of in the media of the Premier with the Property Council. The main rationale for the government to remove decision-making from councils was, and I quote, to take the politics out of planning. If the government was serious about wanting to take the politics out of decision-making in Tasmania, then they should commit to creating a strong anti-corruption watchdog. We have one of the weakest here in Australia. We're also saying that there should be a commitment to electoral funding reform. For example, ban property developers from making political donations, as they have done in New South Wales, ACT and Queensland. We also need to fix our right to information laws. The Environmental Defenders Office research shows our government is the most secretive in Australia. This proposal to replace councils with DAPs and make our planning system even more complicated and was put out for public comment and closed in November last year. Over 500 submissions were received, and thank you so much to the residents opposed to the cable car. The overwhelming majority, that is 95% of submissions were against creating development assessment panels. The DAP proposal means that across Tasmania's urban/private land, state-appointed DAPs, not our elected councillors, would make decisions on developments. The DAPs would sit within the Tasmanian Planning Commission, with the Commission decision being final, with no ability for us, the community, to question the decision via a merits-based planning appeal. Planning appeals are the only way that the community has to hold developers and decision makers to account. Without planning appeals, we do not have a proper voice. We can comment and maybe participate in a hearing, but that'll be it. We locked today's meeting in at the end of 2023, as today was to be the second sitting day of the Tasmanian Parliament. We predicted the DAP bill would have been tabled. But now we find ourselves in a state election called a year early. So we've invited to this meeting all the state election candidates we could contact, all sitting members of state and federal parliament, and all local councillors. Thank you to those who've made the effort to come. I would like to acknowledge the state election candidates here today in alphabetical order. We have Vicar Bailey, Greens candidate for Clark; Tamara Cordova, Independent for Franklin; Helen Burnett, Greens candidate for Clark; Martine Delaley, Independent for Franklin; Sue Hickey, Independent for Clark; Claire Gladwright, Independent for Franklin; Christy Johnson, Independent for Clark; Ben Loberger, Independent for Clark; and Rosalie Woodruff, Greens candidate for Franklin. And sorry, what was your name? And Chris Hannam from the Jackie Lambie Network. Have I forgotten anybody else? Thank you for coming. And what's your position on development assessment panels? And you don't have to answer now if you don't want to, but if you know, you can share with us now. Okay, sure, okay, thank you. So I note that all these candidates, I think I've just said that, all oppose DAPs and the removal of appeal rights. Oh, we have another candidate. Okay, excellent. We have a Lions candidate here. So far we know that DAPs are not in Labor's election policy, but we're not exactly sure what that means. And we know the Liberals are pro-DAPs and the Greens do not support them, and neither do various independents. So thank you all for coming. PMAT is also surveying all the election candidates we can contact on their position on DAPs, and we will be publishing those results on our website in due course. I would now like to introduce our first speaker. We are very fortunate to have here today a guest speaker who's come all the way from Perth, Western Australia, to share his experience with living what he describes as the trauma of DAPs. John Dowson is a man of many parts. He's an award-winning author, public speaker, president of the Fremantle Society, a group who specialises in advocating for planning and heritage, a former Fremantle councillor of 8 years and 4 of those as deputy mayor. John is passionate about preserving and enhancing Fremantle's heritage, with 4 of his 10 books published on that topic. Thank you so much, John, for being here.
And what a great sight. Look, I've got 5 minutes to tell you what you already know, that DAPs, that is Development Assessment Panels, are terrible. DAPs were introduced into Western Australia in 2011 by Premier Colin Barnett's Liberal government, and Barnett has repeatedly told me that they were introduced as a temporary measure to speed up planning approvals for large projects. And on Sunday, after I beat him 8-love in tennis through gritted teeth, he told me yet again, yes, John, we do need to have urgent reform for DAPs. Now, WALGA, the Western Australian Local Government Association, conducted a review in 2020 of 1,773 DAP meetings, and it found, in terms of reliability, that the time taken to determine a development application has doubled to 147 days against the local planning scheme requirement of 60 days or 90 if there is advertising. In terms of efficiency, the number of determinations made by a DAP, each DAP is decreased from 1.95 to 1.35, and in terms of consistency, the rates of refusal are now 11 to 13%, down from 19.5%. Conclusion: the DAP system was ill-prepared and is in need of significant reform. Now, I've got 3 minutes to warn you that DAPs don't make developments better, just bigger. And that when governments talk about reform, they want more power, not less. Reform, a recent government review of DAPs made them even worse. Now, Dr. Honey, the former Liberal leader in Western Australia, said, whatever the developers want, the developers get. There should be a royal commission. Dr. Honey said, it's about delivering a planning system to suit a small group of developers at the expense of communities. Those developers are represented by groups like the Property Council, the chair of which is running for Parliament against Dr. Honey and has just gained pre-selection over him. And disturbingly, I received a text message just a few hours ago alleging that the Property Council has engaged in branch stacking in Dr. Honey's electorate to oust him. Perth is under development pressure from mass immigration, and since the pandemic, property prices have risen 45%, compared with 15% in Melbourne and quite a bit in Hobart. Now, this has led Planning Minister John Carey to seek further powers and to cut process times for example, removing scrutiny by local councillors altogether for single houses. Planning commentator Ken Perry said, when developers apply for incentives by way of height or plot ratio bonuses, they receive millions of dollars in value. But where does this money come from? It comes from the person who sold the property and/or the community which loses share in the amenity of the area. What is amenity like in those new high-rise apartment towers? The ABC reported the case of an 88-year-old Trish Cole who thought that life in an apartment on the edge of the Karrinyup shopping centre would be good. But she reported there is no privacy anymore. But the worst way it has affected me is the volume of traffic. Mainly trying to cross the road. That's the worst thing in my life. I have actually stood in the middle of the road and put my hand up each way. Now, the very groups that should be there to advocate with the community have been infiltrated and bought off. The Heritage Council is no longer an expert, dynamic, trusted heritage organisation. It is a developers' club. The National Trust in WA has been bought off through government funding and told not to engage in advocacy. Councils themselves are under enormous pressure from developers who have easy and early access, often years before the community gets to hear of forthcoming major plans. DAPs seem full of mediocre part-time people, and the move to hire more full-time people simply means fewer, not better, government hand-picked decision makers. Now, I'm president of the 52-year-old Fremantle Society, and my founder, Les Lauder, is in the audience here today. And Fremantle has been rocked by recent major developments at the heart of the heritage town, pushed through by DAP with no modification or recognition of expert commentary or public concerns. I have 1 minute to leave you with 3 horror stories from my heritage town of Fremantle. 1, the new regional police complex. Despite 222 vehement submissions against $100 million new police headquarters to be built in the buffer zone of the World Heritage Fremantle Prison, the overscaled monstrosity sailed through, risking the World Heritage values of the prison. Number 2, oversized new hotel. In the 2-storey heritage heart of Fremantle, WA's richest man, Andrew Forrest, got permission for a 6-storey hotel designed in Sydney for a site sold cheaply by council, which will lead by precedent to the ruination of the low-scale heritage streets nearby. And number 3, building on top of heritage buildings. In the heart of the west end of Fremantle, a small area near the entrance to the port, recognised as maybe the best preserved 19th century port town in the world, DAPs have just approved 2 stories of new apartments on top of a 2-storey heritage building listed as being exceptional, along with a 20% height bonus, thus by precedent ruining the future character of the West End. Good luck. Please network with your local council, get involved early, and for heaven's sake, stop the creation of DAPs in Tasmania. We've had them for 10 years, they are traumatic and just get worse and worse. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for providing those really important insights. Our next speaker is Dr. Phillipa McCormack, Adjunct Lecturer in Law with the University of Tasmania and Researcher with the University of Adelaide, with experience in environmental regulation and administrative law. Dr. McCormack will talk about the role and importance of merits review in planning. And as we've mentioned before, merits-based appeals are based on planning-related grounds, all the things the community cares about, such as impact on cultural and natural heritage, visual impact, traffic, short-stay visitor accommodation, and so much more. Planning appeals are also a vital part of our transparency and democracy, and the New South Wales Independent Commission Against Corruption, ICAC, recommended the expansion of merit-based planning appeals as a deterrent to corruption, but our government wants to reduce them. Thank you very much.
Hello everybody. What an honour. Look at you all. This is a very exciting turnout, and as from an administrative law perspective, I am absolutely thrilled to see this many people who care about the way decisions are made. It fills my heart with hope. So thank you for coming along. The position paper for this proposed reform is based, in part at least, on the idea that politics needs to be taken out of the planning process, and concerns about integrity are really important. I think that that's a really good thing to have in mind, that we want to improve integrity in these kinds of processes. But it seems to me that if integrity is a core concern, then taking some of the most controversial decisions out of the usual pathway, which is decisions made by councillors elected by local communities, informed by expert planners within those councils, and then overseen by an independent body, and moving them instead into a less independent, a question that my colleague Anja will be talking about in more detail, a less transparent and less accountable process is not probably the best way to enhance integrity in decision making. I want to speak briefly about what merits review is, because that's a really important part of this question. and then to explain some of the literature about how it improves decision making. So at the moment, most decisions made about land use planning are made by a council, and then if a person is concerned about that decision, doesn't like that decision, didn't want that decision, there is an opportunity to apply for an appeal. It's a review process that goes to our Tasmanian Civil and Administrative Tribunal. We call them TASCAT. What that is, that appeal right, that opportunity for review, is it's an opportunity to express concern that the decision was not the correct and not the preferable decision in the circumstances. So it goes to the heart of what the decision was. The decision-making process that TASCAT goes through is on the merits, like to look at the decision itself, and then we call it standing in the shoes of the original decision maker. So it is as if they are the council. They look at the evidence, they look at the arguments that you might have about whether something should go ahead or not. They're allowed to hear new arguments, and you can bring new evidence. You can be informed by what the decision was and the reasons for that decision, and then you can come and make a stronger case, bring together all of the information to support your case. And the decision that gets made might be the same one that the council made. It might be slightly different. There might be an approval, for example, with different conditions, or it might be, so it can be rejected, it can be approved or approved with conditions. The point is it presents an opportunity to make a brand new decision, and then it stands as if it was the original decision. So merits review can improve decision-making processes, and it can also really connect communities to decisions that are made in local places where people belong and where people love. So the process that is currently in place allows an independent decision maker to review the decision that was made, to make a new decision. So it's not a review by the original decision maker, which is not what's proposed in the reform. The development assessment panels would kind of combine the process of making the original decision and then reviewing it at the same time, which is unusual and a little bit complicated. But it also, the opportunity to appeal in the way that is currently in place can actually change the way decisions are made at the first instance, because we know that they can be looked at in detail. They can be reviewed by this independent body. So there's an opportunity actually to make a better decision first up. And that kind of pressure has been demonstrated to be a consideration in decision making. We also know that mistakes can be made, not because people are necessarily terrible, but because sometimes there's a lot of information and making a decision is difficult. And so the TASCAT review process creates a backstop, a recognition that we're fallible and we can make better decisions. Sometimes we can correct and catch mistakes. The other thing is it's a public process that can inform and educate about the process of decision-making in land use planning, can help us to understand what's involved, and sometimes it can explain in a different way so that we better understand the decision that's made. It's public, everyone can participate. And perhaps in my last few seconds, my key message really is that taking away a merits review process, taking away the opportunity to apply for an independent review, doesn't actually mean that people won't be worried anymore, doesn't actually take away the concerns that people might have about a decision that's made. And what will be left to those people is judicial review. That can't be excluded. The problem is judicial review, an application to a court to review the decision, is not about whether the decision is good. Judicial review gives you an opportunity to say the decision wasn't lawful. So the person who made the decision didn't act in a way that's consistent with the powers that they had, which means that you find yourself combing through the decision to work out whether they referred to all of the documents they were supposed to, which actually isn't your concern the vast majority of the time. The vast majority of the time you're concerned because the decision is inconsistent with the value that you place in your local place. So judicial review doesn't address the concerns that are there, and they won't go away if merits review isn't available, which can create far greater time blowouts, far greater costs, and perhaps far more political concern. If we wanted to address integrity, I would strongly recommend investing and bolstering the strength of our Integrity Commission and building capacity within our local councils, helping councillors to make great decisions And if only we could see that across Tasmania. As an administrative lawyer, I would be extremely happy.
Thank you, Dr. McCormack. In the middle of last summer holidays, and 7 years after waiting, the government finally released a draft process for public comment on how developments are to be assessed in our national parks and reserves, including our World Heritage areas. We also understand there's a separate issue as whether we should be having developments in our national parks and reserves at all, but if they are going to develop a process, let's have a look at it. Submissions on that process are now open until the 26th of March, and we'll touch on a little bit more about that later. And surprise, surprise, the government wants to create DAPs for public reserve land as well. This means, like it does for urban and private land, that planning appeals are removed. Property developers will be able to bypass local councils and communities. It'll make it easier to approve large-scale contentious developments. It'll increase the risk of corruption and poor planning outcomes. But we'll also see a destruction of reserved land, resurrection of failed developments like the Cataract Gorge gondolas in Launceston and the Kunyani Mount Wellington cable car. And reserve management plans will be able to be changed to suit developers. And the Minister for Parks will have greater power, being able to take any large development proposed for reserved land out of the normal assessment process and have it dealt with by DAPs. So we strongly encourage you to engage in this submission process. I would now like to introduce the new Tasmanian Campaigns Manager of the Wilderness Society, Alice Hardinge. Alice will talk about the need to stop fast-tracking inappropriate development in Lutterita and the importance of being able to appeal bad developments on reserved land. It's important to note that today we have advertised on a reserve a huge wind farm in an area known as the Meredith Ranges Regional Reserve in the Tarkine. So this is an area that's been recommended for World Heritage listing. And although it's being assessed by a slightly different project, the major projects process, that process also removes appeal rights. So this is a sign of things to come. Thank you, Alice.
Hello and thank you. And I believe a presentation is going to be coming up as well. Here we go, great. First of all, I want to acknowledge that I'm on stolen land, the land of the Palawa people, and it is absolutely incredible to see so many people coming together here in the town hall to talk about planning. It's really exciting, so thank you. Yeah. I'd also like to thank the previous speakers as well as Planning Matters Alliance Tasmania for bringing this event together. So, we've heard a fair bit about private development assessment panels, and we've also heard somewhat about public development assessment panels, and I would really like to speak today in this couple of minutes of time that we've got around the absolute dire need to not only scrap the DAPs on private land, but scrap the DAPs on all reserve land. Yeah. The privatisation of wilderness agenda has been long running, almost over a decade now under the Liberal government, and this latest proposed amendments to reserve activity assessments are just the latest tranche of bad decision making, bad policy that really threatens the key integrity of both the cultural and ecological value of the reserve estate in Lutterita, Tasmania. So when we're speaking about the reserve estate, we're talking about over 50% of Lutterita, Tasmania. Within that reserve estate, there are various levels of protection. Some areas have very low levels of protection and are actually subject to logging and mining. However, we need to keep in mind that we're not just talking about the threats to our local favourite conservation area down the road, we're also talking about key major threats of development, and not just for tourism, in areas such as the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area. So, we need to act. It's great to come to a public meeting like this, and really, it's incredible to see how many people are here today. But we also need to get in strong submissions. The submissions close on the 29th of March now, for this process, and I really hope that everyone will engage and also find out more information, not only from the Planning Matters Alliance Tasmania website, but also there's a submission portal on the Wilderness Society website, which I'd highly recommend everyone going and visiting. So when we're talking about what sort of projects we might see come through the development pipeline and through the privatisation of wilderness agenda, there are quite a few projects which many of you may be well aware of. For instance, the Lake Malbina development proposal. That has been a long-standing campaign, and I believe yep, there we go, great, yep. A long-standing campaign and a series of legal battles. And I really wanted to touch on Malbina because not only is it crucial that all candidates who are here today, as well as all you wonderful people, know that Malbina matters, it's also crucial to know that if this current amendment process, this current policy that the Liberal government has put forward, had already gone through, Malbina would very likely already be developed. It was only through being able to use merits-based appeals, as well as having strong community opposition and various aspects of the campaign, that has allowed the community and Wilderness Society and many others, like the Tas National Parks Association, to hold off Malbina proposal. So if we did see this policy from the Liberals go through, then we would be seeing helicopters fly in and out of the World Heritage Area, would be seeing wedge-tail eagles, critically endangered Tasmanian wedge-tail eagles, scared away, and we would see a removal of that crucial appeal right that has helped stop dodgy developments like this thus far. There's also proposals for a development on the South Coast Track. So many of us may have had the privilege and honour of spending time in the wild and stunning southwest. It's absolutely incredible location, and I feel like all of us in Lutruwita, Tasmania are extremely lucky to have such beautiful environments to go visit. However, yeah, thank you. It's a clap for everyone. Woo! Yeah, and we can't take this for granted. And what will be taken for granted by developers and by dodgy government are the ecological integrity and cultural integrity of these areas. So right now, here's a picture of the development proposals at Lake Malbina. So very expensive fly-in, fly-out helicopter tourism, but also in the South Coast Track, which I believe is the next slide. Tyndall's next, sorry. Yeah, with the South Coast Track, we're looking at many huts being popped off in the South Coast Track. So, yes, some of you may have had the joy of walking on the South Coast, but now we're looking at a threat of multiple huts being built and a huge human footprint in this key wilderness area. And if this policy is to go through, it will be increasingly difficult for the community, for environment groups, and for any concerned citizen to actually speak out about this and also seek a review, a merit-based review of some of these decisions. So, ultimately, I really want to thank everyone for coming here today, but know that this is a first step and now action is needed. We need to protect what's left of our wonderful wilderness here in Lutruwita, Tasmania, and we need to address bad planning decisions that are making way for dodgy developments all across this state. Private DAPs are a massive risk, so are DAPs on reserve land. These development assessment panels won't have the same level of accountability. They won't have the same level of accountability to not only the government but also through the judicial process, and it's absolutely crucial that we stand up now and we scrap the DAPs. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Our second last speaker today is Anja Hilkemeijer, lecturer in law at the University of Tasmania, specialising in foundations of public constitutional and human rights law. It is fantastic to have Anja here today. Anja has also co-authored last year an excellent opinion piece, which you can see on our website. Anja will talk about the relatively weak independence of the members of the Tasmanian Planning Commission and panels, comparing it to the much higher level independence of TASCAT, the Tasmanian Civil and Administrative Tribunal, President and members. Thank you, Anja.
Thank you, everyone. It's amazing to see the room filled so much. I don't think I've ever had a lecture theatre quite this full, so a little daunting. I'm going to speak to the assumption that underpins all of the proposals, which is that the Tasmanian Planning Commission and the panels that will be formed under it are independent. And I looked closely at the legislation, and I must say I'm a novice for planning law. And I looked at the legislation with my public law lens, and I could see that it falls short in a number of ways. So for this reason alone, the lack of structural independence of the Planning Commission, the proposed reforms cannot be justified. The law is complex, and I'm going to try and simplify it without losing the nuance. There are usually three key criteria that you look for in an institution to see that it has the features and the capacity to act independently. Number one, the members must be required to possess relevant qualifications as objective evidence of their experience. There should be an open and merits-based selection process, and there should be strong security of employment, because a person that doesn't have that will worry about losing their job if they're acting independently. Now, the Tasmanian Planning Commission falls short in relation to each of these criteria. First, qualifications. If you look at the legislation, you'll see that the Minister may appoint anyone as the chairperson of the Commission. There are no qualifications for this role set out in the Act. Other members of the Commission can be appointed merely on the basis that they have experience in planning or public administration. Now, mere experience, of course, is an easily satisfied threshold. In fact, if you had a dispute with your neighbour over your fence, you might be said to have some experience in planning law. So this is a very weak qualification requirement. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, there are no professional or expertise-related requirements in the Act for members or for people to be appointed to the DAPs. So, for example, in terms of current DAPs, the Commission can appoint absolutely anyone to a panel that determines a project of state significance or a major infrastructure project. For major projects, so that's the third category for which we already have panels, the Commission merely has to be of the opinion that, again, the panellist has relevant experience, again, this very weak requirement. Now, I want to compare this for a moment to TASCAT, because my colleague Phillipa McCormack already spoke to this, that TASCAT plays a very important role to provide independent merits review. And if you look at the qualification for TASCAT, you'll see that the Act requires that both the President and the Deputy Presidents have university qualifications, have been admitted to legal practice by the relevant professional body, and they've worked as Australian legal practitioners for at least 5 years. It's a very, very different style of requirements that ensures that the people who are selected have demonstrated objectively that they have the relevant expertise. If we then turn to the second criteria, the selection process, is it open and merits-based? Well, no. There is no selection process for either the Commission or the panels. The Minister chooses members of the Commission, and the Commission in turn chooses panellists, including from amongst its own membership, without any requirements for public advertising, selection criteria, or due process. Now, if we contrast this to the selection process for members of TASCAT, there is much greater transparency and objectivity. The system for appointment to TASCAT is not perfect, but it's much more likely to lead to the appointment of independent candidates than under the Tasmanian Planning Commission Act. Finally, security of employment. Now, this is really the linchpin of institutional independence. Number one, panel members have no security. The Commission can revoke their appointment at any time during the life of the panel. For members of the Commission itself, there's very little protection. Most of the members of the Commission may be removed by the Minister if they're no longer qualified to be appointed, but they only needed to have experience. If the Minister thinks they don't have experience, they can be easily dismissed. All of this, of course, is in very stark contrast to the security of employment of the President and Deputy Presidents of TASCAT. They may only be removed by a decision of both Houses of Parliament. It's this kind of security of appointment that in our system of government, of checks and balances, is the hallmark of institutional independence. But that's not the whole story. Not only does the Commission rank very badly against those three criteria, but in addition I discovered as I read the Act and read it again and read it again, that 2, possibly 3 members of the 8-member Commission are not appointed in an independent capacity at all. Under the Act, 2 commissioners must be government office holders. And keep in mind that 4 members can constitute a quorum. One is to be the head of the state service, and the other the chairperson of the Tasmanian Water and Sewerage Corporation, wholly owned by the Tasmanian councils. A further member is chosen by the Minister on the recommendation of the Local Government Association. Now, by definition, these 3 people, certainly the first 2, the other one's a little bit more confusing, but certainly the first 2, do not sit on the Commission as individuals, as acting independently. They sit on the Commission in their capacity as office holders or representatives of those bodies. So in conclusion, I'm sure my 5 minutes are up, the Tasmanian Planning Commission Act does not provide the usual indicators for strong institutional independence. There's thus no justification for further replacing the role of councils and the role of TASCAT in planning decision making with that of the Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anja. We also would like to say that we do see that the Tasmanian Planning Commission's role is vital within the planning system, but we would love to see it as part of PMAT's founding platform, that we'd like to see it more independent and ensure that it's properly funded. Our last speaker for today is Lord Mayor of Hobart City Council, Anna Reynolds. The Hobart City Council, one of our most important and largest councils in Lutruwita, opposes DAPs. They oppose the removal of councils to make decisions on development applications and the removal of appeal rights. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Sophie, and thanks so much to everyone for taking such a strong interest in planning. As we know, planning is a complex business, but it benefits from a whole range of perspectives because there isn't just one view of a city or a place, and to get the best outcomes on planning, it is good to have diversity, and it's wonderful to have such a strong, diverse group of people here today taking an interest. So Council is the planning authority with statutory responsibility for planning within the city at the moment. And that means we're responsible for everything from strategic planning, which are some of the proactive plans we're doing for the inner city part of Hobart and other parts of Hobart at the moment, but also interpreting state laws, revising and enforcing local planning schemes. It is a big job, there's no doubt about it, but it is part of a local government's role, and local governments are best placed to undertake and continue our role in planning. So in July 2023, it was announced as a bit of a surprise, I think with a photo opportunity with the Property Council and the Master Builders Association. There was a surprise announcement that the state government would be introducing development assessment panels appointed by the Tas Planning Commission. This occurred without any prior consultation with the local government sector, and it's fair to say there was a lot of unhappy people in the local government sector. Following the announcement, myself and other Greater Hobart mayors wrote to the Premier expressing our disappointment in this, the government's approach to just announcing through press release and not consulting all of the amazing people working in planning in the local government level. So then the council itself put in a submission about this idea, along with many other councils, and this was passed unanimously, I think, or nearly unanimously, but our submission made a few key points, and that was that the Council's position is that the statutory planning functions must remain with local councils, as we are best placed to understand local issues and the potential planning impacts on our community. Our submission said that we are accountable and we have local knowledge, and we have the often nuanced expertise of things in our community that you don't get through the development assessment panel model. We also expressed concerns about the whole model, whether we could basically go through a process and assess a project, and then a developer might decide, well, actually, I don't like that decision, I'm going to have a DAP instead. So the whole construction of the legislation is muddled and flawed, and will create costs, extra costs for councils, which ultimately you will pay for as ratepayers. We also made the point that if a DAP system is to be introduced, there has to be some ability for these assessment panels to draw on local knowledge. They can't operate in a bubble. They have to be able to have the local knowledge about local community issues, otherwise their decisions will be flawed. The assessment timelines in the legislation are unrealistic. We have already the shortest statutory timeframe in the country. 42 days is the period of time that we have under law to receive an application, assess whether we've got all the information we need, advertise it, wait for community input, and then for our planners to assess it and come to council. So it's already ridiculously short, and the timeframes in the legislation are just unrealistic. There's also, the Council said that it disagreed with the assumption that the introduction of DAPs will quash controversy because somehow it'll just mean that community concerns will just disappear. It's just not realistic, because people want to feel that they have their say. Now, we won't always agree on all planning matters, and many people won't be happy with the decisions that a council makes or council officers make. But at least there is that sense of having an opportunity to have input and having some accountability with your local organisation and ultimately with your democratically elected representatives. So the other thing that's really important is this is coming off the back of an assumption that it's planning approvals that are stopping housing. And I think everyone in this room agrees that we want more housing, particularly for young people. We need more housing in our cities, and we want that housing to be well planned, it to be livable, affordable, all of those things. And those kind of developments are coming through to us. We have about 400 apartment projects that have already been approved in the CBD of Hobart. They're all, most of them are medium density, pretty well designed. Again, not perfect. We don't always love all of them, but they fit within our planning rules. But they're not held up because they haven't been approved. They have been approved, and the hold-ups are around finance, are around the lack of competition in the building sector that leads to high costs. There are so many other factors that are leading to building completions not happening. So it's not the planning necessarily that's holding up housing, it's a whole range of other things. And yet it's so easy for state governments in particular to whack councils and say it's council's fault they're holding up planning. It's not true, and it's just a very simplistic model that really helps developer mates. So we would say that we want to continue our role on behalf of you to be part of the planning process, to lead the planning process. It's not easy, it's tricky to get planners at the moment, but we certainly recognise that local councils, informed by you as the community, are the best people to decide the future of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lord Mayor. In the couple of minutes we have remaining, on your seats you have some Take Action flyers that Nick McKim's office has kindly printed for us. On this QR code will take you to the same information. We really encourage you to put in a submission regarding the DAPs on reserved land. There's various organisations running submission guides, but PMAT has done one as well. We'd also really encourage you to talk to your state election candidates about their position on DAPs. And if you feel like just doing one action or doing all those actions that we've suggested, it will make a difference. So thank you in advance. The other thing you could also do is talk to your local councillors and encourage them to scrap the DAPs for urban and private land as well. To finish up, I would like to thank again all the fantastic speakers. You have provided some really important insights into this flawed proposed process. I'd like to thank everyone here for coming today. We had asked all the media, but unfortunately they haven't turned up. And I also want to thank the Planning Matters Alliance Volunteer Board, who supports the work. We have two paid people in the Planning Matters Alliance, both working part-time, and we couldn't do our work without you. So thank you so much. And thank you again, and the live broadcast will be available on our Facebook page all the way into the future, so encourage others, share it, and get engaged, and I'm sure that we can ensure that Tasmania's community has a voice into the future. Thank you.